Welcome to the Liberty Without Compromise podcast with Dan and Dawna Wilson. This is episode 7 in the series Power Player Pastors of Kootenai County. We're going in depth to uncover what's going on with the leadership in the largest and most influential churches in Coeur d'Alene. This special series is comprised of transcripts from actual conversations. Now here's Dan to give a recap before we move through these remaining transcripts.
Last episode, the parishioner discussed the helicopter and discussed the Show You Proof Challenge, Norris's lack of ability to do a public debate, even though I had requested it. And then there was the discussion about Dan Wilson, according to the pastor, did not do enough to wine and dine and get this pastor's attention. He's a pretty important person. He doesn't want to sound arrogant, but he's a pretty important thing. And, you know, Dan Wilson is just a mudslinger. And that's where we left the last episode. Again, we have the original recordings, and these transcripts are from those original recordings that we obtained legally. I did not send anybody ever to this pastor to speak on my behalf. This pastor was approached by parishioners, several, that had concerns as to why he was not supporting or at all interested in a candidate that seemingly checks off all the boxes that he talks about in his Sunday morning services and his other teachings around the area. You know, he is very politically involved. I know that he's the lead, or was for a while, for prayers in Coeur d'Alene. And so anyway, we're going to jump in now halfway through. Once again, I am reading both the transcript for the parishioner and the pastor, and Dawna is going to be speaking for the Fed. So we're jumping back in. The parishioner's talking with the pastor and says, yeah, I've been an advocate for you, even when talking with Dan and this other part of Dan and this question about what's important in his life. Jesus Christ is important in his life. Pastor, well, where does he go to church? Parishioner, he doesn't right now. And there's a lot behind that. Pastor, I think I know some of it. Can I tell you what I've heard? And can you tell me if it's true? Parishioner, I might not know the answer. Pastor, okay, this is for our conversation. What I've heard is that he was an evangelical Christian, and then he became a Catholic. And then as a Catholic, he had an affair with his assistant, divorced his wife, and his present wife was his former assistant. Now they're married, and he got excommunicated from the Catholic Church because of that. I'm only giving you that rumor mill. Parishioner, see, that's what you've been subjected to.
And meaning, I want to put that in the right voice. The parishioner says, basically telling the pastor, now see, that's what you've been subject to.
Mm-hmm.
That was a bold statement for the parishioner to stop him and just be like, now, come on now.
The parishioner goes on, as far as what I know, this is completely false. He has a beautiful spirit and loved his message when I went to the Reagan Republicans and saw the verbal attacks by so-called KCRCC members just really at him, and he was very strong and composed and handled it so well against such hate being thrown at him. I don't know where I was going with this because there's so much in my head. Pastor, well, the rumor mill and gossip. Parishioner, he, Dan Wilson, has such a beautiful story. You're an advocate for John Padula, and there's so much more there with John and his beautiful spirit. And sometimes I see the lashing about people attacking John and the same people attacking Dan without knowing Dan. And that's why I came here to advocate, because maybe what he looks like on video could come out across really different, but he almost aligns so much with you. Honestly, I was surprised to find out he didn't go to our church because he's a very straight up type of guy. Now, we're going to stop here. So he's spreading rumors.
He even says a rumor mill.
Mm-hmm.
And when they forgot where they were going, he came back and he's like, oh, we were talking about the rumor mill and gossip.
Yeah.
Okay.
For the record, I've been a follower of Jesus Christ since I was 4 years old. As imperfect as my walk has been, there isn't a day that goes by that I'm not reminded of who my Creator and Savior is, and I read His Word daily. despite not currently going to any kind of organized church gathering, which that's for another topic, another time. But I'm like many other people, I'm burned out. Now, I can tell you that it's hilarious to me. I don't even know how to pray the rosary. So how and who it was that started this rumor, it's ludicrous. No, you and I were not Catholic together. I didn't run away with you. And I definitely was not re-excommunicated. So I have been a Protestant.
Re-excommunicated.
Or excommunicated, yeah.
You were excommunicated and then re-excommunicated.
Right.
Well, the funny thing about this is earlier in the conversation, as we read in the transcripts, they alluded to questions like the pastor asked question, well, is Dan Wilson a white supremacist? And, there's things that I've heard about you that scare me, the type of guy you are, and what's your position on Israel? And you know where they were going with that. So you have to at least ask yourself the question, when the pastor gave this, hey, you know what I've heard? I mean, come on. Did he even hear it, or was he starting it? Was he trying to start it?
Well, we know that many from his congregation, those that we're going to talk about later, his advisors, they flat out continually posted lies throughout the entire campaign, bald-faced lies. It wasn't even so much as, can you clarify, is this true or isn't? They just flat out engaged in false propaganda.
And as we became privy to this conversation through tapes, we started to realize that what was coming out of the pastor's mouth and the former federal agent's mouth, the thought was, okay, is this the nucleus, or is this the people who are gathering in this room, the pastor and the Fed and whoever their political advisors are, who they refer to in this meeting? Is this the nucleus where the intel that they want to go out, that they want to push out about Dan Wilson, it starts here, and then there are the extensions of it, some of the other people who attend that church and so on, where we were hearing that on social media, and it sounded strikingly similar.
Yeah, all same talking points over and over again.
Yep.
Yeah, so I'll say this again, the absolute most vile people to me, for the most part, outside of the Bob Norris sycophant inside former Southern California law enforcement that want to keep a California cop up here as sheriff, the worst people, the most vile people, were the people that went to church and part of the KCRCC. And more specifically, 3 of these individuals run their mouths constantly about their Christianity.
Well, and guess what? They need to be investigated.
They're going to.
They need to be investigated. Okay, where did you come from? Seattle? Where'd you come from? Sacramento?
Yeah.
Well, what church did you attend there? What was your leadership position? Have you attended seminary or Bible college? When you're going to start painting yourself to be somebody here and attending a church and being influential politically,
right,
and your foundation is, and I'm a Christian and I attend this church and I'm throwing scripture around, I want to know what your background and history is. What's your spiritual resume if you're going to use that as part of your political platform? And it's disgusting, and that is what needs to happen with them, because they came out to not just diminish you, but obliterate. I mean, to destroy, eviscerate.
And these are people that call themselves Christians.
And there's, I mean, who am I to say? It just isn't so.
Well, we know that along with the Fed, 3 of these others, and we're going to be talking about them in future episodes, attend and have claimed that they are special advisors to this pastor on a weekly basis, as I understand.
Yeah, they all hail from this church.
Yeah, and not a one of them will do anything biblically. So again, somebody that I have openly and frequently proclaimed my faith. And these people claim it too, and yet not a one of them ever bothered to call me up and say, "Hey, let's have a conversation. Let's push things aside. We may not think that you're the right guy for the job, but how dare other Christians be as vile?"
You don't. You aren't.
Yeah.
And there is no middle ground. Yeah. There's not an in between. There's not, what is it? Are they going to claim it's a righteous anger? No, that is not how you behave. People of faith Don't do that to one another. You at least take the ground, like Dan was mentioning, where you go straight to the source and you have a conversation, and that is what a person of faith does. And every motion they took proves absolutely opposite, and there is no middle ground. You're on one side or you're the other. You don't sit in the middle.
We're going to go on. The pastor says that I'll admit that this has been one of my, you talk about what perceptions look like. I thought to myself the same thing. Well, if he's really this, why isn't he here? And he's referring to his church. For example, why didn't he come to the Jim Jordan event? Of all the places he could be as a potential sheriff, I would never have missed that, because everybody who would have been the strongest advocates for conservative values would have been in this room that night. And he wasn't there. I was looking for him. And I don't know if he's going to be on that cruise that's coming up with Russ Fulcher next Friday, who's, by the way, a local Idaho congressman. He goes on, I don't know any of that. So I'm looking at all these things as an outsider. And again, a guy who hates politics. And all I can see is mudslinging and lack of credibility from my vantage point. Parishioner. But two things don't make a right. I think there's so much more commonality because he's a very private person. We all say that Trump has faults. He stepped up. He doesn't have to do this. And I feel the same way with Dan. Now we're going to stop right here. Why wasn't I at the Jim Jordan event? Well, number one, I think Jim Jordan is a complete dumbass. He's Trey Gowdy 2.0. I'm not a rah-rah Republican guy. Jim Jordan did nothing for over 4 years but hold hearings. Did absolutely nothing. Zilch. Zero. I would not have gone across the street if I happened to see him walking down the street, because frankly, I have zero respect for the dude. I liked him in the beginning, thought he was a bulldog, but he's like Trey Gowdy, absolutely worthless. Number two, why would I go to the church to hobnob? Because I want to pretend I like this. People don't know me. I mean, I don't do this with anybody. If I don't think that they're, if I'm not interested in what they have to say, I'm not going to go and do some special event just to try to get votes.
What blows my mind for this pastor who claims, he says, I hate politics, but he sure is chock full of advice on when you should be where and why you didn't show up. And he was looking around for you. One, a guy who he chose to disregard, to throw the email in the trash, your email in the trash.
Which he admits later on.
He does. So, oops, a little teaser there. But yeah, he admits to throwing the email in the trash. And so never so much as even try to get together with you, not even a phone call. But then he's, you should have been here and you should have done that. And you should have, this would be, everybody who's conservative would have been in his play. I was looking for you. Why weren't you here? Ask you.
Well, he can't because he was never interested. He just wants to run his mouth.
It's alliances.
So the pastor says again, well, you know how I feel about Trump now. Were you here when I was asked to be the pastor to represent the state of Idaho? I just can't do it. Parishioner, well, I respect that. Pastor. So my advice to Dan, since you guys will probably reflect with him on this, take the high road. Do the right things. Stand for what you believe in. Don't create your campaign as a smear campaign, and he'll get much further. He won't win this election. It's too late in my view. The sheriff will win. And in part, the reason the sheriff will win is because of the way Dan has handled this. The smear campaign factor. And that doesn't mean that Dan doesn't have maybe a lot to offer our community, but it would be so much better if he could just find a way to work together.
Okay, stop. I have to interject this.
I love it.
You ran a smear campaign. You're running a smear campaign.
You're full of crap, Pastor.
Yeah, so Dan Wilson's running a smear campaign. Bob Norris isn't. The pastor tells Bob, no, don't do this. Don't go there, bro. But guess what? Bob Norris doesn't, he's got how many other people running a smear campaign on his behalf? Yeah. Okay, so Bob Norris doesn't have poo on his hands because he's got all these proxies out there doing his dirty work. You don't think the pastor bringing up in this meeting, Dan Wilson, white supremacist, Dan Wilson, what's his position on Israel? Dan Wilson, I see the people he's surrounded with and they're vocal in the wrong way. Dan Wilson, he's going to cause people to rise up and the wrong kind of disobedience and possible. Dan Wilson terrifies me. What that Bob Norris doesn't need a website to report on anything negative about Dan Wilson because he's got all his proxies in the community out there doing it, and proxies coming out of this church to smear Dan Wilson on social media.
And I'm going to say this to the pastor. Once again, you're completely misleading people when you say that it was mudslinging. Because you as a pastor, on Sunday mornings or Wednesday or whenever you are preaching, if at any time you call out anybody for their behavior and you say that what they're doing is wrong or unbiblical or immoral or unethical or however you want to state it, then you're a mudslinger.
Yeah, preaching the gospel.
You open up your mouth, pastor, and you set the precedent. So guess what, pastor? You're a chronic mudslinger. Now, since you opened up your mouth, pastor, go back. My website's still open. Show me anything that I put on there that was not valid. Did I ever come out and say Bob Norris is an adulterer, even though we know that he's been married 4 times? Well, I mean, you know, I didn't go the route that Bob Norris did. I didn't go and contact and bring to an event a former ex-wife. I didn't have my advocates bring up things with my ex-wife and stepchildren. I wasn't saying the heinous things that you couldn't even control your own people not to say.
Bob Norris is the only one that's going to be standing in between in a photograph, documented photograph, to put on Facebook to smear into your face. Bob Norris standing between your ex-wife and somebody that came in to advocate for her when ex-wife was continuing to smear you, and they were using that as a tactic in their campaign.
Well, this pastor, you're a disingenuous liar. And I'd love to tell you it to your face, but
one other thing I want to add about our supposed smear campaign website, and then we'll move on. We had to create a media distribution channel of our own because as Dan Wilson was doing a year of investigative research and report writing and findings on what's going on with Robert Bob Norris, with the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office, as he was finding facts and evidence, we needed to report on it. And that's truth slinging. And so that is the phrase that we coined in this campaign. It is not mudslinging, it is truth slinging. And since no local media chooses to report on it because they're all in an alliance to have their guy in office, somebody needed to put their own time, talent, and treasure into creating a media distribution channel that actually will report the facts based on a year of investigative research.
Yeah, so I know this pastor won't do it, but you show me any place where I smeared anybody.
It's all there. None of it's been taken down. It's all there.
So every time from here on out, anybody hears this pastor talk and he calls out anybody in their behavior, whether it's the people the Coeur d'Alene City Council he doesn't like, those that are doing things that he thinks.
Tribe?
Yeah. Anytime you run your mouth against any of them, you're nothing but a mudslinger. So we're going to go on. The pastor, he just got done saying we need to work together, and he says, "Well, why don't I pray and we can just call the end of the meeting?"
Because they know it's gone way over.
The parishioner, "Well, thank you for your time, Pastor. Are you kidding? I love you guys. It's just sad for me because I don't want us to have to be in this condition. For example, if I knew John Padula was going to lose, did I actually think he was going to win? I didn't think so, and it didn't matter. I made myself the adversary to the sheriff, my friend Bob Norris, who is my friend. I made myself an adversary to him because I sided with my other friend John Padula against the candidate that Norris, wanted. And so I just don't play the political games." How many times does he have to say that, by the way?
No, when you do, who are you trying to convince?
He goes on, "I have loyalties, and my loyalties right now are with Bob, in spite of him. Read that well. Okay, this guy has never let me down. If I call him and say I need something, he's there. If he needs something, from my vantage point, the idea of our being able to find ways to work together and to be stronger as a result is a very big deal to me. Again, I'm only giving you my perceptions." Who's Dan Wilson? Where did he come from? Why did he come here? Why is he attacking our sheriff, who is my friend? I don't know anything about this guy, and he doesn't have the respect for me to come to me directly. And again, forgive me, I'm going to say this. I carry a lot of weight in this town. I would think that would be, if this guy was wise, he would have said, I'm going to get to the pastor before I get to anybody. So forgive me for that. That sounds terribly arrogant. I know that this is the parishioner. I know that you're known for taking a stand. Pastor, even when I'm being careful about this in public and on Sundays, because we have people in this church that I love dearly that are divided over this, and I don't want this church divided. I'm just trying to keep my mouth shut and pray. Because, we have some very wonderful people that go to this church that are very outspoken in favor of Dan, and they have approached me too, just like you. And I said, look, here's my position. You guys do what you feel convicted to do. You have my applause. Do what you feel good about. We've got no issues, but I'm going to leave it alone. I hope you know I'm not being adversarial.
So the former Fed jumps in and says, I have something I'd like to say really quick.
Pastor, I know we went longer, and I hope it's okay with you that I was this transparent. Parishioner, I appreciate your transparency.
And the Fed says, you know what? It's worth it to me. You're worth it to me. All right. My apologies. You have the floor. You have the final word, she says to the pastor.
Okay. And we're going to stop again because there's a lot to go back over. So the pastor, how many times did he say, Bob Norris is my friend? Over and over and over. Despite him, in spite of him, he's my friend. Wilson's not going to win. I'm only giving you my perceptions of Wilson. He didn't come to me directly. I should have cleared everything and made certain to get to him before anybody else because he's so powerful. Do you know we have a modern day Pharisee living right here in Coeur d'Alene? Modern day Pharisee right here in Coeur d'Alene. And it's just wild for me to think that he was actually saying this stuff. He had never said that to me personally, So,
you don't think had you and the pastor gotten together, you don't think he would have said these things to you, directly to you?
Heck no.
Okay.
No.
But he did allude to the fact that, as he was having the conversation with his parishioner, that they would probably take portions of this conversation back to you, and he was aware of that. So it's interesting that he'd be willing. There's some kind of risk that he's taking that, this is probably going to get back to Dan in some way, but he wouldn't come out. You don't think he'd come out and say it to you? I don't think so either. I was curious.
We won't do it again, but in episode 1, you will hear my response. Well, my lack of response, but after this meeting that we're talking about now, he didn't know that we had the transcripts at the time. And then also his gaslighting emails that he sent to me where, he says, I admit that I received your email, but frankly, it offended me and I threw it away.
And that was the first time that we had heard, however many months later. That was
from the
months later.
From the end of January to the end of September.
Yeah, so you heard everything back that I don't know what you're talking about, haven't heard from Wilson, and then his story changed, and it's like, I think he sent an email, but it was short and vague, and I don't even know what he wanted. And then finally, 2 months later, you get an email that says, I got it.
Because he's so busy.
I got it.
The guy is such a busy dude. I didn't punch in the secret number to figure out how the best way to contact him. Apparently, I'm supposed to ask him 3 times, and he'd be like, no.
And invite him to a steak dinner.
Yeah, steak dinner.
He probably wanted to go to Wolf Lodge,
so
you're out of luck now.
Burned down.
Yeah.
All right, would you take it over from line 204?
Yeah, the former federal agent, she's been pretty quiet for quite a bit here in the recent part of the conversation. You could tell she's chomping at the bit because the pastor says I've taken too much of the time, and the Fed's like, no, this is your show. This is your show. She's reassuring the pastor that this is his show. Those are her words. She goes on to say, I just wanted to say that I think this has been amazing because I think we have lost this in our society and in politics today. that people with different opinions can sit down and talk. Because as I was growing up, this is what we did. So I, especially you, but one thing, she says to the parishioner, especially you, but one thing that I want to challenge you to do that I don't see a lot in people today, and it's something I learned in school when I was growing up. I did debate a lot in school, and what they would always do, and if I was, say, anti-abortion, I would be assigned to say that I would be pro-abortion in debate class. And it's like, no. But then it's the best way to learn because it strengthens your position. And I grew up in a family that was very legalistic church. My mother never wanted me to visit other churches with friends. And I believe that you should question everything, including what you're being taught in your faith. Is your pastor biblically sound? And he will never, I'm going to go out on a limb, but I think I know the pastor well enough. He will never condemn anybody for saying, I believe this. Well, show me. And so I would send you forward with a challenge, not only with Dan, but just in life. You should know Dan Wilson as well as anybody can if you're going to advocate for him. You shouldn't have to read off of a piece of paper. You should know what he stands for and why he stands for it. You should also know your sources and understand whether that source is credible or not, and in and of themselves, but also whether they're credible in the community. So, like, how do people view the information that's coming from Teresa Roth?
Parishioner says, well, I think it depends.
The Fed says, well, who is Teresa Roth? What is her background? Because just being a researcher, if you're not an objective researcher, then you're going to get slanted research. And that's what we have in society now. We have all these different organizations that are research. They want you to believe that just because I say it, it's right.
Pastor, if you massage the data long enough, it will confess to anything.
The Fed says, but what I love books with footnotes because I can read something and reference, where did this come from? So I would challenge you to be that person. Don't adopt someone else's attitude or their opinion. And I'm not saying you don't do that, but I'm saying, no, you should question people. And if they're upset with you questioning them, because I will tell you, for example, I will tell you, I know a lot about the helicopter, and I have questioned the crap out of that whole situation to the point that I'm satisfied. And I know why I believe and that I can point to why I believe that. And I think that's why you should do on everything, including not only Dan Wilson, but whoever you vote for. And if you're going to defend somebody, like if I defend pastor, I'm kind of staking my reputation on him. So the biggest complaint I've seen about Dan from people that I know, I would love to know how he is going to do what he says he's going to do. And nobody can figure that out. I've tried to figure out. I've tried to make it to events. I can't. I want to be able to say, I don't know what's Dan going to do. Well, Dan's going to do this. My opinion of whether or not I think it's a good or a bad idea, but none of us, including me, knows how Dan's going to put together this sweeping plan that sounds great, but can you do it? And how are you going to do it? That's my advice and my compliment to you. It's great that you're out pounding pavement for the campaign, because whether or not we agree or disagree.
Pastor, I love it. The town square, let's have conversation, and no contradiction to you, because you had a systematic process, and with no interruption by me, you would have been making your case point by point, and I want to commend you for that.
And the Fed says, I do agree.
Okay, let's stop. There was a lot said.
They love the public forum. Let's get together and have this discourse, even though we disagree.
Mm-hmm.
However, both of these people, the pastor and former federal agent,
liars,
had months to be in any kind of town square with you, to have a civil conversation with you, whether they agreed or disagreed. They claim to be so confused. Mm-hmm. I'm so confused by Dan Wilson and his positions and how he thinks he's going to do what he says he's going to do. The federal agent goes into this mode of taking the parishioners who bothers to show up this meeting, and they continually interrupt them,
right? And
that they're aligning themselves with you, and that puts them in a dangerous spot. But taking all this effort to educate them on how they need to go in and represent somebody else's position.
Right.
And they're so the pastor and the Fed are so afraid of you.
Well, here's what I'm going to go
you.
back about this former Fed. We think former. This former Fed has been involved in so many things in Kootenai County. Very odd. You retired as a Homeland Security.
Yeah, take this slow.
Agent.
Take this part slow. Many things.
By their own admission at the beginning of episode 1 or 2, the Fed discloses that they were Homeland Security specializing in human trafficking. They then went to go work for the state of Washington as a tort claim investigator for 5 or 6 years. Now, most retired cops, whatever agency you work for, you come to Kootenai County, your spouse is also former retired, law enforcement, federal law enforcement. You don't have a reason to have to work. But yet this individual is not only weekly advising the pastor, weekly advising Bob Norris, is advising other people. I found through FOIA that this individual, despite they were talking about earlier the helicopter program and being concerned about the whole thing, well, this person is involved with the Kootenai Regional Air Support Unit in advising for various functions, and I found the emails.
And
their husband is the chief pilot for this program.
But positioning themselves as some kind of an objective source. So I had questions about this program, and I asked from top to bottom until I was satisfied with the answers.
Former head of the Republican Federated Women, sits on various boards, art commissions up in Hayden.
Has started their own Back the Blue style nonprofit, is involved in another local, semi-regional, very large nonprofit in the area, volunteering there, hand in that pie.
Involved in all sorts of things and part of a local preparedness group. You want to talk about how the misinformation, the deflecting that this former Fed is doing on purpose, because they know exactly what they're doing when they're talking.
Red herring manipulation
is
tactic.
They said, hey, and this is why I'm concerned that this person is here at a minimum to handle Norris and Matari, but also to report back to Homeland Security or other federal law enforcement 3-letter agencies what's going on. They've infiltrated all sorts of organizations. In fact, credible firsthand witnesses that were at this local preparedness group when this person, now remember earlier, it was stated that I scare them, because I gather all these fringe people, even though I can't control who supports me, and I have a Bundy-like spirit. But this former federal agent said to a group that they were going to, if a federal agent ever came for them, because they're with a bunch of independent, liberty-minded, prepared individuals of North Idaho. Well, if federal agents ever come for me, I'm going to shoot them right between the eyes. This was heard by very credible sources. And to me, it sounds like a federal agitator. Somebody to go in and set people up so that they get all riled up. And then, you sweep in with 3-letter agencies and arrest people and charge people. I mean, that's what it sounds like to me. But this person is involved in all sorts of organizations, is seen all over Kootenai County. I don't know how they have enough time in the day, but here's what I will call out and say that they're full of crap again. We said this earlier in one of the other episodes. You and I both were standing at the fair booth, which was right adjacent to the Kootenai County Regional or Kootenai County Republican Central Committee's booth. They walked through the fair, hand in hand, strolling along. They see us and they walk purposely all the way as far away from us as they can to reach the booth that was right next to us. She could have come right then and there.
This same person was at another event where we came early and you were there after the fact, where they were present with some of the other what I will call agitators of the Norris.
You're talking about the one that was later on in the campaign?
Much later on, yeah.
And so that was another interesting little tidbit, because, of course, this was for the innocent, talking about human trafficking in Kootenai County. And this former Fed that specialized in human trafficking as an agent posed a question to the group that was presenting, Nate Lewis and his one of his law enforcement partners. And they never clued in on the fact that this person was asking extremely pointed, law enforcement oriented questions, which I thought was very interesting. This is a person that advises Bob Norris. You see them together frequently. And yet this disingenuous former Fed, we don't know if they're still a contractor or still active, never made time to come and meet with me personally. Never came to any of the numerous 11 months we did town halls and private meet and greets. Never came to me at any of these. Never sent me an email. Never sent me a direct message. Nothing. Had zero interest. And I have to ask myself, why do you think a former Fed is not interested in having a one-on-one conversation?
Well, they're sure interested in investing a lot of time in what they are spreading that they do or don't know about you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the interest is definitely there. The investment is there, but to go out of their way to avoid you.
I keep questioning, are we really dealing with a federal operation up here that is controlling the so-called right wing of Kootenai County? Is the pastors involved with it? Are they leveraging the pastors? Are they coercing them? Do they have them blackmailed?
Yeah, with this former federal agent specifically, you brought up a very good point, and then I'm going to let you wrap up this episode, and we'll have just one more before we complete the series. But you said, when you mentioned all of the things that the former federal agent is here in Kootenai County currently involved in, and you rattled off a list of 6 or 7 things. And you said, I don't even know how they have the time of the day. Mm-hmm. But just ask yourself this. If you've had a career and you're here to retire, how many things does one person get involved with just because it's my hobby, it's my point of interest, I want to keep my mind sharp, I want to stay active. You go volunteer somewhere. Mm-hmm. You go to a women's Bible study once a week. You do the meal train. I mean, I'm not trying to say a female should do this or that specific activity, like, only women's Bible study. But it's rattling off all of the things. Yeah. Counseling or
advising.
Wrong word. Advising to pastoral staff, advisor to
a sheriff,
frequents town halls, is head of the Women's Federated KCRCC, involved in helping plan those fundraising
local
events.
nonprofits,
yes.
Advisor,
and then in the church. Mm-hmm. Think about, why would a person, and then the resiliency group, why would a person want to be in all of these places, coming across as motherly, a kind person, experienced, empathetic? I'm here to advise you. Oh, let me stop you in what you're thinking. What about this? What about this way? Or as an agitator, willing, able to kind of meld into what the need is for that specific group. Why would a person, I'm not saying they're paid, not paid, but there has to be some return on that investment. Nobody puts in that much time and is in that many places for either intel or to influence people. Nobody just does that as a retirement hobby.
Yeah. I agree, and I think that it's very dangerous. I think that Kootenai County and North Idaho is one of those last frontiers, so to speak, when it comes to rebellious Americans, not to be confused with the so-called racist Aryan nations. That was not as big of a deal as what they're saying. I never condoned it, would not condone it, but they've tried to label us as this extremist group up here. We're not. We're just people that believed in the original principles of this country and liberty without compromise. So a federal agent, a former, that is now up here and involved in everything from churches to law enforcement, former Homeland Security. Bob Norris, what did he work under? Homeland Security. How many people up here in the churches, how many people part of the KCRCC leadership, how many of these people, like the folks that are running the local chat groups, You know, some of those that we'll talk about later, the ones that we talked that were spreading propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
How many of these groups are on Homeland Security or other federal agencies' payrolls? And why is nobody asking the questions? We have a lot of dumb people up here. As smart as people are, we also have a lot of dumb people not asking the questions.
Well, and I think sadly, we look around at the community and wonder the people who born and bred here hold this home most dear. And that is the unfortunate conclusion, is because we have been stupid. And you should feel offended. You should feel offended that they could swoop into this community and that we could be that easily taken.
Yeah, because all they have to say is MAGA, Second Amendment, and you know what? We're not going to let anybody take our county away from us.
Yeah, they're not on your side. They don't respect you. They aren't doing it with your best interest in mind. They came in and said a couple of magic words, and the community is kowtowing.
And I believe I scared the hell out of them.
I know
when I came out of
left
field, and they all were convinced that somebody had put me up to it. But I was a man that was convinced that these idiots running Kootenai County needed to be challenged. More specifically, Bob Norris, who has no business being a sheriff, nor Bruce Matari as special deputy. Now, we're going to go back one quick second here, and then we're going to wrap this up because we've done a long outro.
Mm-hmm. That's
okay.
All right. There's no music rolling.
The continue statements. We just don't know how Dan Wilson's going to roll this stuff out.
How's he going to?
How's he going to do it? How's he going to do it?
These sound like good things, but how's he going to do it?
Hey, federal agent, what would you know anyway? Because you were just a federal agent. I mean, really, stay in your own lane. Maybe you don't understand states' rights and the ability of the sheriff, or actually, better yet, you do know the power of the sheriff. And you have to know that Bob Norris is a complete moron who never once believed that there was any issues going on with illegal invasion here in the area, that didn't even know what ICE 287G was. And you're running interference because you know he is such a horrible candidate, a horrible, incompetent buffoon of a sheriff, that you're running interference for him. Because maybe that's why you were sent up here. Bob Norris did make a statement when he ran the very first time to Captain Mike Bauer. They sent me up here to run. And it's amazing to me how many people arrived on scene right about the same time from these various parts of the country. Matari, Norris, this former Fed, the activists. A lot of these people arrived at the end of the Obama administration. And we know that Trump was spied on not only during his campaign, but after he became president. We know the deep state went after him, the FBI and other federal law enforcement agencies. So if they can do it to him, why in the hell do we think that they can't and are not doing it up here right now? And they knew that a man like Dan Wilson was a threat to their operation that's going on right here, right now. Prove me wrong. And with that, that's a good place to stop.
Yeah, it just about is. And one thing to add to that is for anybody who said, okay, I'm kind of getting with you guys, I'm getting with the program. We've been taken advantage of. And like we had a guy email us last week, how does a Joe Schmo like me get involved? How do I help? I now see what's going on. What do I do? Yeah. But Dan just stated this perfectly. One guy, Dan Wilson, came out. And when they say, even in this meeting and these transcripts that we're reading through, when they say Dan Wilson terrifies me, okay, Dan Wilson doesn't terrify them for the reasons that they're trying to position, paint you to be. But you do terrify them. Who's behind this guy? He's got his finger on every bit of this crap that we're trying to pull. How does he know this? Where's he getting his intel? So my encouragement to you, the listener, and those in the community now realizing we've been had, what can we do? It's the pushback. Dan Wilson was one guy, and he did and will continue and is terrifying them. And so There needs to be a collection of us that
they couldn't find dirt on me in 10 months.
They couldn't. And the reality is this is not to fear. These are buffoons in these positions. And you have to really see some of the levity in it. Otherwise, you just lean in the corner, rattling in fear, like, what am I going to do? But you've got to see some of the levity in it and realize these people are not smarter than you. They were opportunists. They have backing. They came in at the right time. But that's not the end of the road. So and Dan, he'll throw more encouragement in this next episode when we're wrapping up this series as far as what can we do.
Yeah, special message for this pastor, since you don't think that I'm a follower of Christ. He who walks with integrity walks securely, but he who makes his paths crooked will be found out.
Thank you for listening to episode 7 of the Liberty Without Compromise podcast. This is the Power Player Pastors series. Listen and subscribe at libertywithoutcompromise.com or wherever you get your shows.